Hello, everybody. This is Alim Barry again, the host of the Coexist program, and I'm glad to have you here on this second episode of our program. Today, we're going to talk about something that has basically preoccupied every single legal mind out there, and that is the men's rights movement. Whoa! Men's rights movement, is that even a thing? Yes, of course. Just as we have the women's rights movement, we also have the men's rights movement. So today we're going to examine the men's rights movement to see if there is actually something to it, if there is substance to it, or if it's just a backlash against the feminism movement. But before that, we're going to have a little bit tweak into our program. Henceforth, we're going to be bringing you fun facts or questions just so that you could be more enlightened and knowledgeable about incredible women who have done so much for the fight for feminism and the progress we've made over the years and the work we still have to do in terms of bringing about gender equality in the 21st century. So today we're going to start with a question, and here's the question. So, who was one of the most prominent men present at the International Women's Rights Convention in 1848? Again, who was one of the prominent men present at the International Women's Rights Convention in 1848? You got A, William Lloyd Garrison, B, John Brown, C, Richard Prescott, D, Frederick Douglass. So I encourage you guys to, to check that out and share your thoughts. But definitely wait for the answer towards the end of our program. So let's get back to our main topic, men's rights movement. What is it about, actually? Quite frankly, I was not aware of the men's rights movement, honestly. I wasn't until a friend literally told me that, hey, you're a feminist, you're trying to make sure that, guys are privy to the plights of women and girls outside there. Have you heard of the men's rights movement supposedly fighting for men's rights in the world and basically trying to say men also should be valued? So I was like, oh, wow, let me check it out. And I did, and boy, it was something, literally. So today we're going to talk about it and, try to put it basically in comparison to the feminism movement and try to see if, there's some substance to it. So the men's rights movement basically purport to fight for men's value, supposedly, and it also try to fight, discrimination against men. And for some time now, it has lied on the edges, basically. However, in some part of the world, surprisingly, the men's rights movement has seemed to find a political grassroots platform to sustain it. So, for instance, in India, this is actually reality. Check this out, guys.
We have to change the society how they think. They think that crime is associated with only men. For this reason, we are here. There was no one who talks about men's issues.
In the US, the men's rights movement is largely contained within online fringe hate groups who maybe meet once a year. But in India, the men's rights activism movement has sort of grown into its own legitimate political platform.
That's right. The men's rights movement has grown into its own legit political platform in India. Oh boy, honestly, this is this is a massive thing going on right now. I'm like, literally, it has its own political platform in India, and it's becoming a thing. Like literally, whoa. Okay, I can't emphasize this enough. But before we drop this down, before we try to criticize the men's rights movement, we need to get a perspective, in a sense. What is it about? When did it start? Or, what are the main core principles behind this movement? So, apparently, the men's rights movement started way back in the 70s, way before I even came to the world. Like, literally, it has been a thing. And it was a predominant movement even back then when it started. And to my knowledge, I dug deeper. I was like, hey, listen, let's figure out what is this movement about, and try to trace its roots, its origin, and trying to see basically if there's something much more to it. And apparently, there is something more to it. So the movement was started by Warren Farrell. Again, Warren Farrell. Now, this guy right here, he's sort of you could say the founder of the movement, because his work basically in gender equality, in the rights, in human rights basically, kind of laid the foundation, sort of laid the platform for the men's rights movement. And he has multiple books. He's published multiple books that talked about how men, and he has multiple books that talked about how men are kind of discriminated against. And he went on to say, that it's definitely the society is not structured in favor of men. And basically, he laid the foundation that says that men's rights movement is a thing. And the movement has been steadily growing globally to address men's rights that have been neglected in laws, that have created a lot of unbalanced system against men, and basically system that result to men being systematically discriminated against in parenting rights, in child custody, in criminal enticing, military conscription, education, in right, in domestic and sexual false accusation against men, and reproductive right, and all that basically. So that it's why he tried to address wide range of issues where men have been systematically be discriminated against. Now, wait a minute. This guy is saying that men have been systematically discriminated against? Wow, it's it's really incredible. But I guess again we have to go back to our question. Is there substance to it, or is it just a backlash? Against feminism, or against women who are fighting for women's rights? Who have done many incredible progress in terms of making sure that women are counted in this process. So let's examine it. So one of the things that they try to say that men tend to engage in more violent crime than anyone else. So the deaths of men as a result of violence crime, it's higher than that of women. Actually, that is actually true. 90% of men actually, died in violent crime in relation to women. That is a fact. No one dispute that. That's for sure. Now, another point they like to make is that women have made so much progress that in the education system, they are dominating men in a sense. And that is actually might not be far from the truth, because today, in 2020, women actually they graduate 60% more, they're likely to graduate from college 60% more than men, which is fairly good, because we're having more intellectual women in society, women who are bringing about progress, and that's actually fair. There's another point that they like to make, is that men occupy the most dangerous positions, or the most dangerous jobs in the world. And again, I do not deny that. That's actually true. But one key point they like to make is that, and especially this is from my American friend, it's so funny. I was having a conversation with a friend who is so involved in this movement, and he told me that men, especially American men, are more obese than women. And I checked that out. 70% of men in America are obese in relation to women, who are only 59% obese. Really? Man, come on. Seriously, is that even a reason behind this movement? Like, just because 70% of men are obese in relation to women, who are only 59% obese, that constitutes a reason behind the men's rights movement. However, Warren Farrell might be moderate in his view. He was just saying, hey, guys, while we're advocating for, women's rights in the world, while we're ensuring that, we give access to girls, we give girls access to education, we empower women, we should also look at, men. They have issues, that are contributing to their failures in society. And that, honestly, quite frankly, that is a fair position to take. However, over the years, there have been many people, who have taken this movement, and turned it into something else. For instance, this guy here, Paul Ehrman, the founder of A Voice for Men. The founder of Voice for Men, Paul Ehrman, is actually one of those guys who have, literally called for, the abolition, I would say the abolition of the feminism. He said the men's rights movement needs to be taken to the next level, in a sense that it's not only about fighting for men's issue anymore, that men can only strive, basically, at the expense of women, in a sense. So what he's trying to say is that, well, we must address men's issues. However, the root cause of men's issues are women. Hence, we are less likely to coexist in a society. So he is known basically for, creating nuisances out there and basically creating a platform where men can echo their concerns. But some of those concerns tend to be, violence in a sense against women, tend to be disparaging remarks about women. And I would definitely urge you guys to check this guy online. His name is Paul Ehrman, I think that's his name. And he definitely believes that basically men should be men and we should not care about women, and that, men are failing. Now, here's the deal. Some of their reasoning, okay, some of the point they raise behind the issues of men, you know what I'm trying to say, are quite legit, quite frankly. Men falling behind in education, men are more likely to dive in depression, men are more likely to die from dangerous jobs, in a sense, and these are all legit concerns, and they need to be addressed, quite frankly. And when it comes to certain things, I could definitely relate to some of their concerns, in a sense. But here's the deal, and this is the thing that, and this is a position that feminists have been making, have taken, and it's a concern that feminists have been echoing all along. They've been saying that, wait a minute, listen, we're fighting for our liberation here, but our liberation also includes yours. In a sense, what they're saying is that your liberation depends on ours. Oh boy. All right, now I'm sounding like Nelson Mandela, how you could better convey to the whites that their liberation depend on theirs. But that's actually the point feminist movement have been making, that, listen, this patriarchal system we live in, has been creating problems and nuisances for both of us. So it's better that we deconstruct it and create a space where we both can live and be basically coexist together without problems. So my response to this is that much of the concerns that the men's rights movement have raised, can be the answers to those concerns, okay, cannot be found within the current patriarchal system we all occupy in, or the system that they occupy in a sense. In fact, it is that system, that patriarchal system, that has contributed to most of the problems that they are so much concerned with. Take, for instance, when they say men commit suicide, Okay? Now, they're forgetting the fact that women are more likely, again, more likely to commit suicide. But it's just that men happen to just take a violent way and kill themselves rapidly. They just don't think. Women might might go through the slow process, and who knows, she might be saved, you know? But men, we just go, boom, violent object, and that's it. That explains why men are more likely to die. Sorry, that explains why men die from suicide more than women. But again, don't get confused. Women are more likely to commit suicide. So let's take suicide, for instance. And the cause of suicide has been traced to depression. And where is there depression? Again, that can be traced back of lack of emotional, strong, stable mindset, which we don't have, in a sense. We men, we don't have that. You know, we lack an emotional space within us. You know, that patriarchal system has told us that, you know what, men, you got to man up. You know what I mean? You just don't cry. You know, don't show emotion. If you do so, you'll be perceived as weak. And we men, we're more, especially us men, we are the police of ourselves, basically. We always say, you know what, if you cry, nah, you're not a man. I remember once, and this is actually something that happened to me when I was growing up, you know, back in the days, back home, you know, it's a kind of, you know, it's a tough society. You just have to toughen up and get out every day. And I got to say, I had fun, quite frankly, as a kid. But I remember once I hurt myself and I was bleeding extremely. And I remember I was crying, like literally crying. And I went home to my custodian and I was like, boy, this is hurt. This hurts. I got to be taken to the hospital. The first thing my custodian told me was like, dude, you're a man up. You know, why are you crying? People get shot on the battlefield and still run. Here you are, you're just bleeding from a tiny cut and you're crying. Seriously? Literally, and guess what? I was just 12 years old back then. Just 12 years old. So it started very early on where you tell boys that they should not harbor emotions. You know, they should not, they're man. You're trying to groom them to be man. And part of that grooming means that you have to be strong, you shouldn't show emotion, but perhaps you should suppress your emotions when it comes to things like that. And I have to say, that thinking has been part of me, and I've been trying to get rid of that thinking ever since. You know, recently I met some of my friends in an event. And the event was basically about how men could get out of that bubble, you know, and basically understand the women's right and the cause they're fighting for, and try to understand that they're also fighting for us. Ironically, right there after the event, you know, while with my friends and I were engaging in a sense, and we're talking about some of our personal stuff. One of my friends, a very good friend of mine, and someone who's also engaged, who's also dedicated, you know, his career, his time, and his life to bringing about gender equality here in the 21st century. He pointed out that, wait a minute, you know, isn't that contrary to what this event is about? Isn't that contrary to what you stand for? Here you are, you know, saying that, you know, we should not suppress our emotion, and yet you are somehow suppressing your emotion when it comes to certain things. And I'm glad he pointed out to me. I was like, listen, this is something I'm still fighting. You know, it's something I'm going through, and I'm trying to let my emotion out there. You know, but here's the deal. The more we release that emotion, the more likely we get help. You know, the more likely we are to be stable. And the less likely we are to commit suicide. So that's one element, okay? Now, the second element is that, you know, more men die from violent crime than women. Like, seriously. Like, seriously, is that even a reason for you to literally give this movement a voice? More men die in violent crime than women. Isn't that obvious? That if you engage in a violent crime, you're going to die at some point? Or you're more likely to die if you engage in a violent crime? So more men die because more men engage in violent crime. And what is the reason, by the way, behind this violent crime is that strong mentality, that toxic masculinity that contributes to this violence, in a sense. You know, if we are taught from the get-go as boys that it is important not to harbor anger to the extent of wanting to take another man's life, or to the extent of wanting to inflict harm on another man, you know, if we're taught from the early that it is important, you know, to have a very stable perspective when it comes to fighting out there, I guess you would definitely see that, you know, you would definitely have less men engaging, less men dying from violent crime. Now, there's statistics out there, okay? And I could throw statistics at you and you'll be like, whoa, wait a minute. So I'm definitely going to put down those statistics down there. I'm going to throw in some links under this video so that you could check it out for yourself and tell me what you think, sure. But definitely there are some truth to these claims. These statistics paint a clear picture, a clear reality, but what we have to understand that we have to put this into a broader context, and that is feminism, the movement feminism, okay? What is the core of feminism is fighting for equality, and not just equality for women, but also equality for men, okay? That is the core of feminism. We both are equal. We can live in a society. Tell me a law that was passed, okay, way back 100 years ago, 20, in fact 50 years ago, that prevented men from voting. Now, in America, you can definitely, some part of the way you can definitely say that, yeah, some men were discriminated against, men of color, yes. But I'm talking about men in general here. If you will, you can say, let's say white privilege, you know, male. Tell me a law that was passed that prevented men from voting. No law. Or tell me a time when men actually marched, literally organized themselves, you know, for their right to vote. With the exception, of course, of African American in America, and some part of, you know, in some part of the world where the minorities basically were silenced. Like I said, again here, it's important to keep a broader perspective. I'm talking about male in general, if you will. White male, if you will, okay? No law. And yet women, especially white women, okay, had to fight for their right to vote. They had to fight for their right to their body. They had to fight for equal pay. Okay, they had to fight for their right to be on equal measure with men. Legally. I'm talking about legally here. Now, while, you know, and we've seen progress from those movements. We've seen progress from those organized efforts from women. So historically, women have been marginalized. Historically, women have been marginalized, and not men. So historically, women have been at the bottom of the pile, not men. Now, this is not to diminish the concerns of the men's rights movement, of course. They have a legit concern, as I have been saying throughout this program. They have a legit concerns, and we must address this concern. I'm a man, for Christ's sake, you know. I definitely want to address some of those problems that affect me too as a man, you know, because I grew up in that patriarchal culture, in that patriarchal structure, in that patriarchal society that promotes these norms. So yeah, I could definitely see myself there, but I think perhaps the most important thing is that our problems can be solved when we coexist with women. Our problem can be solved when we share a platform with women. Because I believe most of our problems can be traced back to the current patriarchal structure we occupy in. So we have to deconstruct that structure first, okay? And then talk about addressing those problems and talk about coexisting together. Because we will never be, we will never have that opportunity to address this problem that men face, without first of all acknowledging that, hey, we have a shared blame here. We must embrace that blame. And then we must also, acknowledge that it's not women's fault. So basically, to me, this movement is a backlash against feminism. Yeah, it's a backlash against feminism. Because they've seen the progress we've been making, they've seen the progress women have made in society, and they're saying, hey, you know what? It's time for you guys to go down now. So basically, the moment you hurt a man's ego, boom, he's like, nah, this can't happen, this can't happen, So we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to definitely come together and fight this. Now, I'm not saying, like I said, and I will keep repeating this so that my message will not be taken out of context. I'm not saying these concerns are not legit, okay? For instance, when I talk about fathers, literally losing the child custody, that is true. There are laws that have been favoring women over men in terms of child custody, in terms of parenting. And I have a friend who has been suffering from that, And I'm not going to divulge the circumstances of his marriage, but definitely he has not had his chance to see his baby girl, He's not had the chance to see his baby girl for the last 3 years, okay? Now, each situation is unique. But because there are laws put in place, he's not been able to do that. And every time he comes to me, I see how much he loves his child. But even him, more optimistic than ever, he still believes that it is only through feminism, it is only through this collective platform, would we be able to address some of the challenges and concerns men face. And he always tell me, when I first mentioned, he was like, "Bah, don't get trapped into, Barry, don't get trapped into this, feminist, this men's rights movement. It's just a BS thing, They're just victims, in a sense, vulnerable people who's, cannot handle a man, cannot handle a woman achieving a little bit progress in society, in a sense." So, yes, that is the case, and I definitely think that we should pay more attention to that. So I think it's a backlash against feminism, and I think they have a pervasive sense of victimhood, those who are part of the men's rights movement and those who try to promote it, in a sense, and to deny it, to literally go against feminism and try to compare these two platforms, or try to say that, men's rights movement, it should exist and should exist at the expense of women, or at the expense of the feminism movement, and therefore the feminism must, and it's for anyone to justify its claim, or for anyone to promote this movement, it's either, intellectually dishonest, cognitively deficient, or definitely detached from reality, in a sense. So, and they try to prey on vulnerable people, vulnerable men who are lost in beliefs, who are lost in faith, and perhaps, and most importantly, who are lost in life. So I encourage you, men and boys, okay, to focus on what's more important, and that is achieving that is not necessarily achieving gender equality, but that's perhaps most important, that is creating a platform where our issues can be addressed with the issues of women. Because we coexist together. We are living in a society where we must live together, okay? And we're not going to sideline each other's concerns and challenges. We must solve those concerns together. So I encourage every man, every guy out there to literally stand with the feminism movement, because I believe in my opinion, it is the only platform, that provides you, that gives you the opportunity to address your concerns and not literally wind back to that toxic masculinity that we grow up with, basically. So definitely we should strive against that, and we should strive for a better equality, because hey, you empower a woman, you empower society, and if the woman has her right and has the right not only to live in a society but to succeed and have the same opportunity as you, we all are better off with that. So yeah, that is definitely a call, and I encourage every man to stand up with the feminist movement, be a feminist, stand for women's rights, stand for girls' education, so that not only women and girls will be liberated, but also you as a man, you as a boy will be liberated and live in a society devoid of misogyny, devoid of sexism, devoid of oppression against men and, of course, women. Now, I know some of you are wondering the answer to our questions, and here is the answer to our question. The correct answer, is D. Frederick Douglass. That's right. Frederick Douglass. Now, Frederick Douglass was one of the most prominent guy present at the Women's Convention. One of the most prominent guy present at the Women's Convention. And if you could, I don't know if you could, this is him. And let me just give you a bit of context with about Frederick Douglass. It's someone I revere a lot. And, Americans basically, you would say, revere a lot. And I think he's also respected around the world. Those who engage in African-American studies definitely know about his work. So Frederick Douglass was an ex-slave. He was a slave. He was born as a slave. He grew up knowing that his right to life is basically limited. But that did not stop him from getting an education. In fact, at the age of 8, when he was, transferred from one plantation to another, his master's wife, started teaching him how to read and write. And because he was incredibly smart, he was able to, capture in fast, start reading and basically move forward. And then he moved to Baltimore, Maryland, of course. Maryland is a state in America. And there, he met his first wife, Anne Marie, who also helped him escape and run. Basically, he came to New York, also a state in America. And right there, he started advocating for the liberation of black people in America. And of course, with the help of, William Lloyd Garrison, who saw the talent in him, who saw that vigor, that passion, that enthusiasm in him, also helped him to galvanize his base and help this young man basically achieve a height of success. And he was able to do that. But his life was threatened once more. He published a book highlighting his life as a slave, and that put him much more in jeopardy, because back then in the States, back in the 1800s, or let's say 1700s to 1800s, African Americans were still slaves. And so, he ran away as a slave. And there are some states that were free of slaves. There are some states, basically slave is a norm. And however, if you run as a slave, the free states, it's required to send you back to your master. So he ran to England, where he was warmly welcomed. His work was appreciated. And because they saw that vigor and talent in him, his friends was able to organize, gather funding from him and buy him. Can you imagine? Buy him, literally, buy him from his master. Literally, so that he wouldn't be a fugitive running away every single way. That is absurd, as someone sitting here right now, as an African sitting in America, basically, to imagine that someone would have to work very hard to buy himself from his masters. It's just just literally incredible, you know. So he did that, and he came back to the States. He went to Rochester, New York, and he settled down there. He started to engage more in the civil rights movement of America back in it. This was way before the 1960 civil rights. So he became what we call in America abolitionist, started fighting for the slaves, for the freedom of slaves in America. And he also encouraged African Americans to join the fight in the Civil War, fighting for the North. And I would definitely encourage you to go check the Civil War in America. It's a very remarkable period in America that not only liberated African American, but set an incredible phase in American political and economic saga. So I would definitely encourage you to check that out. So Frederick Douglass was a very key figure, and he had gained prominent, of course, across America through his work, through his oratory skills, and he was able to galvanize support and eventually befriended Abraham Lincoln when he was president, put pressure on him to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, which liberated the African American back then. And and after that, after his work, you know, trying to liberate African American, which was successful, by the way, it was the work of Frederick Douglass, of course, alongside great men like I mentioned, William Lloyd Garrison and John Brown, you know, and folks like that, and of course, Abraham Lincoln. It was the great endeavor of Frederick Douglass that led to the liberation of African Americans. So he's, you know, widely considered a hero, and rightfully so. So after that, he's also a statesman. You know, he is the first African American, by the way, to be nominated or to be literally to occupy a political value in America, in a sense. I think he's the first African American to be nominated vice president. And under President Benjamin Harrison, he was sent to Haiti as a minister there for America. And nowadays we call that ambassador of America to a foreign nation. So he was there, and then he came back right here, writing more, enlightening the black American black then, trying to encourage him to focus more on education and try to liberate himself. He basically believed that education was a fundamental tool to liberate the African American. So he did that. However, because his life was shaped by the women he surrounded, but you have to understand that Frederick Douglass, he's, you know, very little known, it's not about his personal life, but his entire life was shaped by women around him, basically, from his first wife, Anne Marie, who basically helped him escape, you know, as a slave, to run away and fight for his freedom somewhere else as a free man in New York. So he helped him escape Baltimore, where he was a slave, to New York, basically. So Anne Marie was a critical figure. And then you have his second wife, who was a white, Helen, I forgot her last name, but I definitely was, I think, Helen Pitt or something like that. Yeah, that's the second wife, who also contributed immensely to his intellectual work back then. So his life was surrounded basically by women and was shaped by women. And he came to realize a little early that, you know what, women actually deserve the right to their life. They deserve a right to vote. They deserve a right to basically be part of the general political discourse. And so that's why he went to the Women's Convention, the first Women's Convention in 1848. He spoke, his presence there alone, because back then he was already a prominent figure, did not only illuminate the value of men involved in the movement, but also shows that, you know, we need both men and women to be in the fight together. So he went there, he showed his support. Right after that, I think 10 or 20 years after, 10 years in the course, he kept fighting for it. Yes, though, you know, he did went into a clash with the founders of the women's rights movement back then, but, you know, basically over, you know, basically whose right should be acknowledged first. legally in American Constitution. His argument basically was like, black were struggling, hence black have been struggling for decades, blacks' right. Basically, black did not have right to exist, and white women were relatively privileged to men, to African American then. Hence, he made the argument that, black African Americans should receive that right first before women, literally, which, I will leave his argument to him. I'm not here to justify his argument, but the most important thing we should remember of him at this point for us is that he was a significant man in terms of pushing for women's rights in his own era. Right until his death. In fact, the last speech he gave, literally, it was on an International Women's Council, literally. That was the last speech he gave before he died. Like literally, I think the next day or that evening, he died. But it was on International Women's, I was in the day of the International Women's Council, and he went there. They invited him to speak about women's rights and the importance of having men, because back then, literally men were literally not politically and culturally inclined to embrace that. And he calls himself, women's right man, if you will. He literally embraced that term, and he started spreading that term across everywhere, basically. Started encouraging his fellas, started talking about women's issues more. He started articulating women's issues more in his newspaper, which is called the North Star back then, sharing light on the struggles that women face. So, basically, there is a historical, there's a historical sense to men coming up right now and standing for women's right, and girls' right to education, So this is not a new thing to see a guy standing up for women's right and being a feminist. There's a historical trace to that. So and I'm proud that he stood for women's right. So I definitely, in that spirit, I definitely encourage each and every one of you, the guys, to stand up, and let's not just talk, let's walk the talk, And I feel like he's a guy who walked the talk. So I encourage every guy, again, once, to stand up, be a feminist, proud feminist, yes. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid. Don't literally shy away from the label. Embrace it. And literally act on that, act on that label, act on that belief that every man and woman should be equal. Act on it. Do not just say it. Do not just embrace the term. I want you to act on it in your everyday life. And that is why it's essential. And today we'll end this program with Frederick Douglass' quote that I think captures the essence of this program. And that is, it was hers before she comprehended it. It is inscribed upon powers and facilities of her soul, and no customs, law, or usage can ever destroy it. Basically, what he's trying to say is that women's capacity, ability, and endowment, belong to her, basically. And her right to exist, her right to vote, her right to engage in political discourse, her right to be economically independent was endowed to her, was given to her by God. And therefore, men, society cannot revoke that from her. So I definitely encourage each and every one of us to live by that quote and literally give women space to thrive. And of course, at the same time, while still paying attention to the issues we men and the issues and struggle we face. And I firmly believe we can only solve that when we come together on the table, sit down and address the fundamental issues that affect both of us, but perhaps most importantly, realize the fundamental causes behind those issues. Because I believe it is only through collaboration, mutual understanding, and collective effort would we be able to address these concerns that the men's rights movement claims, and achieve gender equality at the same time. Thank each and every one of us for joining us today, and I encourage you once again to check out the links of these statistics down. I'll be literally adding this statistic down literally on the video, just so that you get a knowledge or a perspective of what I'm talking about. And I encourage you to join us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Okay, drop your comment. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you disagree, or if you're a proponent of the men's rights movement, or basically bring in your perspective, because I believe it's only through conversation, would we illuminate ourselves, would we widen our horizon, widen our perspective, and finally, as I hope, come together and achieve gender equality. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today, and see you again next time. Ciao.